Good morning. My name is Hannah Combest, and I'm the CEO of the National Auctioneers Association. Now, you may be wondering why Aaron asked his former boss to serve as a keynote speaker, and frankly, I'm wondering that too. However, I have to admit, I'm really excited about this because Aaron knows that I am passionate about foresight and its applications. And today we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about how foresight can help you and your club prepare for a better tomorrow. Now, I do have a PowerPoint presentation, and I am planning on sharing my screen. I'm going to see if this works well or not, so please give me a minute just to take care of this. There it works. So I've got it working, I think. So first of all, let's start off with what is foresight. Foresight is not trend analysis. Now, most of us in business today as business professionals, we know that in order to continue to keep our businesses afloat, we need to have some trend analysis. That's how we manage our business. We have nothing better to showcase this than our current situation with the pandemic. If I didn't know I don't know any organization that hasn't been touched in some way by COVID-19. If I were in person, I would ask how many of you have experienced a loss of fundraising revenue this year, and my expectation is that most of you would raise your hands. Well, foresight is also not about environmental scanning and looking at things that are going to happen tomorrow and managing that situation. Environmental scanning is definitely a big component of foresight, but that's not all there is to it. In fact, we can't look into a crystal ball and predict what's going to happen. We can, however, look at potential disruptors and talk about those disruptors and make plans accordingly. And that's where foresight comes in. Foresight is about creating the future that you want for your organization. It's about looking at the past and seeing what has happened and looking at the future and seeing what is going to be happening, and consistently doing that so that it becomes a part of the system that you can use as part of your planning process. Now, why is it important to talk about the future when you talk about your Sertoma club? According to your website on Sertoma, today over 50 million people in the United States alone suffer from some kind of hearing loss. Your leadership is already talking about foresight because you have identified that with our technological lifestyle, that number is going to continue to grow and you're going to have more people with hearing impairments. That's why you exist as an organization, to raise money and awareness for your passion, creating a world where everyone who chooses can hear us. So how can you use foresight to improve the value that you bring to this world? Well, there are 4 different ways that typically foresight is used. First of all, through strategic planning, figuring out where your club is going to go and how it's going to get there. It can also be a very powerful tool with risk analysis. And let's talk a little bit about risk analysis. Think about the changes that we all had to make during the pandemic. We had to stop and think about what would work best. Any association or club learning is another area where it works well. You bring in speakers for your meetings. And in fact, think about those meetings and think about the future and think about who in your community can you bring in to talk about the future of technology to be used on hearing loss, or the future of fundraising, or about the future of marketing and communications. All of these are reasons to integrate foresight into your club's practices. Now, if you take a look just at 10 years ago, let's just look back just a little ways and see how quickly change is occurring. It's hard to believe that it was only 10 years ago that the iPad was introduced. Had that not occurred, think about where we would be today. While many of us don't use an iPad as a business tool, Aaron does, I would be lost without it this year. And most of the people in Kansas who are taking school classes virtually would be lost due to the pandemic. I'm not sure when Steve Jobs and the folks at Apple really thought about the iPad. I'm sure it probably wasn't to create an educational tool, but it certainly has become that. Go back 10 years further, and you're talking about looking at the first camera phone. Camera phones with music installed in them. Oh, and yeah, there was also a phone there as well. The development of the iPhone is really one of the most fascinating stories because it was tied to, it was really the phone component was the third component of the reason for the development of this product. They had developed the iPod. Many of us remember the old iPod for music and wanted to put it into one product that people would just have to carry one thing around, not a phone and an iPod and a camera. So they combined all three. Now, whether you're an Apple or an Android user, no one can dispute the fact that camera phones have uses that far exceeded our expectations. Just recently, I was diagnosed with COVID-19. I had a very mild case, fortunately, but I had a telemedicine experience. I had never had a telemedicine appointment before. And that particular exercise, that telemedicine experience, because of the pandemic, is exploding. And that's not something that's going to change back. Now, go back even further. Go back to one of the biggest advancements in society in the world today, penicillin. This is not even 100 years old. It was not developed, it was not introduced until 1928. And so you think about all of the societal changes that have occurred since the advent of penicillin, the women in the workforce, the explosion of immigration, civil rights issues. And then you think about the technological changes such as penicillin, the advent of the computer. It's changes happening so much more rapidly. It's accelerating significantly. So it becomes important for us as we start looking at foresight to trying to determine what are the major impacts that your group will experience over the next 10 to 15 years. As I looked at Sertoma, I think you have several things that you can review. Let's go over these 4 things very briefly so you can see how these conversations play out. First of all, demographics and the changing faces of society. There are a lot of changes that are happening in the demographics, but US, not just in the US, but in the world as well. We see that today as we watch the news and we see the kind of impacts that are occurring on social justice issues. When you look at today and you look at these individual trends or what we call drivers of change, we'll start with a biggie as something we can all see. Currently, the boomers constitute the biggest and largest generation that has ever been in the workforce. But in 2014, just a few short years ago, the millennials took over. And there are now more than 75 million millennials in the workplace. And it's only going to grow as boomers begin to reach 65 and begin to retire. Just as an FYI, all boomers will be 65 by the year 2030. By 2055, the Census Bureau predicts that the U.S. will not have a single racial majority. The population growth is linked to new Asian and Hispanic immigration as well as other areas. Multiracial issues are becoming to the forefront of our experiences today. Last year, December, NAA, we had an individual by the name of Greg Fine, who is the CEO of CCIM, a commercial real estate organization. And he was our keynote speaker at the real estate workshop. And he said, and I'm going to quote him, "Get over the millennials. You got to worry about Gen Z. Gen X was accepting of diversity. Millennials, diversity is expected. But with Gen Z, if it is absent, they are uncomfortable. And Gen Z is coming right close." Now, what does that mean to your clubs? How diverse are you? Do you have members who are different ages, different genders, different ethnicities, different sexual orientations? Or do your clubs look like me, except for perhaps male? It's not that this is bad. We're not trying to take anyone out of the picture, but let's talk about what you're missing out on. In 2015, the Nonprofit Times, which is a highly recognized media in nonprofit management, published a study on which donors give to which organizations. Giving it a place of worship is the top venue for donors who are white, African American, Hispanic, Asian, and Hispanic. But Asian donors are more likely to give to health charities, local service agencies, and children's charities. White Americans make up the majority of donors. Nearly 3/4 of donors today are non-Hispanic whites, despite the fact that whites make up only 64% of the population. Now, conversely, this study finds that both African Americans and Hispanics are underrepresented in the donor universe. Asian donor participation appears congruent with what the Asian population size. But as people of color become majorities in communities across America, successful nonprofit organizations will need to have a diverse donor base to sustain and grow their operations. So my question for you is, what money are you leaving on the table because your fundraising efforts are not reaching all of your intended growth? Now, let's shift a little bit. Will economic trends adversely affect society? Oh, boy, has this changed since I started thinking about this topic. So demographic trends are changing, and you as a Sertoma club need to think about those. But now let's think about our own national economy. Think back to 100 years ago, to what was happening 100 years ago in the 1920s. 2/3 of Americans were living in poverty in 1920. Think about what is happening today. According to the Center for Economic and Policy Research, a Washington, D.C. based think tank, it's a tale of two countries. For the 117 million U.S. adults in the bottom half of the income distribution, growth has been non-existent for a generation, while at the top of the ladder, it has been extraordinarily strong. Now, things like the pandemic and social justice issues have impacted negatively our economy. And what no one is talking about is what's happening next. There are many things out of our control. Recently, I listened to a presentation from a professor at K-State University, Dr. Michael Taylor, who talked about land values and what is happening in Kansas and the farm community. She mentioned several times the trade war with China had negatively impacted the economy, and I kept thinking the trade war with China in Kansas. Well, in fact, it does. If the trade war finally ends with China, then there's going to be more opportunities for farmers to sell their goods. What's going to happen if the European Union dissolves? What will happen to the euro? We live in a global society, And we need to talk about how things like this are going to impact our trade with Europe. Many of you may be my age or a little bit older, and you may remember Desert Storm. You may remember what happened to gas prices during that time. It was significantly higher than it is today. Will this happen again after the explosion in Lebanon? No one knows who's in control there. What impact will that have on our own economy? We have experienced, up until the pandemic, the longest uninterrupted economic expansion in U.S. history. But that could end with a recession, and many believe that there is a recession occurring today. Trade policy, a stock market correction, geopolitical crisis, the pandemic, all of these are cited as potential triggers for the next economic reversal. We say this happens during the pandemic when the market dropped so quickly. We saw this clearly and then regained its footing. What if the U.S. economy does slide into a recession next year or later this year? Like I said, some people already believe that we're there. Will we be doing this amidst a softening home buying demand that is expected to be lower by the first part of the year than it is now? According to Zillow, sponsored research conducted by Pulsomics, this was from a panel of 100 real estate experts in 2018. Among those with an opinion, exactly half said they expected the next recession to begin at some point in 2021, and that housing won't be the main cause, but it will definitely be impacted. Now, all of these things impacts your club's members in terms of their time and their financial resources available for fundraising. Technology will continue to make society, will have an impact on society. When I was a kid, my favorite show was The Jetsons. I dreamed of flying cars and having a Rosie of my own. Today, we may not have flying cars, but drones are expected to take over the delivery system in many U.S. cities. And many of us have turned on or off a television without using a remote control. We haven't done that in years, or as I have recently, using my phone because I lost my remote. And who uses Siri or Alexa? Our voice-controlled virtual assistants are changing the way that we live. If you think about the technology impacts that these kinds of things are going to be happening, how are they going to change your business? How are they going to change your club? Artificial intelligence, using that voice recognition software, the ability to carry things mobily, cybersecurity issues. This is huge because as we have more and more opportunities to use technology, we become more and more vulnerable. We have issues that we've never thought about. Cybersecurity hacks where they will actually kidnap your data. These issues are huge, and these are things that can wreck your business. But on the good side too, technology enables the collection of data in ways that we didn't think possible. Now our listings can be very customized to individuals that could become your clients. And let's think about the way that it's entered our currency. How do you collect donations? Are you able to use Google Wallet, PayPal, Venmo, or other apps to collect funds? Because that's the way millennials are paying for things. And this is now. I mean, this is not in 5 years or 10 years. This is now. Think about the way that currency is going to be changing in the next 5 or 10 years. It's pretty incredible. And of course, as society becomes more and more challenging, accepting donations becomes more and more challenges. challenging, it is critical that you look at what is coming down the road, making sure that your club is conforming to all of the regulatory issues on a national, state, local basis. And local could mean everything from county to district to even region. It's crazy. Okay, Hannah, there's too much here. What are we going to do? How do we start talking about this? And here's some very simple steps that I hope will help you. First of all, keep the conversation going. It's not hard to, if you use these four trends that I've identified for you: demographics, geopolitical, the economy, and regulations. Think about in those four terms. Then you can start thinking about who in your community are doing new and different things. If you live close to a university, call the university and find out who's doing different types of research. And use the tools that Sertoma provides. They'll start providing materials to help you get your speakers, to help you think about things that are going to be impacting your organization. You know, ultimately, all we can do is look at what's happened in the past and keep our eyes out open in the future. And if we start thinking about things that could disrupt our clubs, then we're going to be prepared. You know, I love this quote, and I don't know who said it. If anybody does, please send it to me. But it's good leaders are able to respond to change effectively. And I think that's what we've done recently. We have responded to change effectively. But really great leaders anticipate change. And that's where I think sometimes we all fall a little bit short. We're so worried about dealing with what the change is in front of us that we don't think about the change that could be occurring in the next 5 to 10 years. I hope this presentation has given you something to think about. I hope that it is at least made you think about a few things. I've enjoyed making the presentation and wish I were there with you tonight or this morning. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I've given you my name and telephone number and contact information. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call. And if you lose that material, just ask Aaron. He'll be glad to give you my information. Thanks so much, and thanks for treating him so well, and Brandy McGrath-Kong. They're both alumni at NAA. We love them to death, but we are so pleased that they are with you. Thanks, and for inviting me. I appreciate it.